Hi, I'm Candace Blevins, and I write paranormal romance that requires a safe word. Today, I'm reading from Imperfect Gifts, a reverse harem featuring a tiny owl shifter, an ancient snake shifter with a head as big as a Volkswagen bug, and feral twin cougar shifters raised as animals, trying to learn to be semi-civilized men. If you love protective alphas, competent heroines, and kinky found family, you're in the right place. Imperfect Gifts is available in Kindle Unlimited. Link in the description and comments. Here we go. Dev stood in the shadows, masking his scent, and watched the adorable little owl shifter with eyes of golden brown strip out of her nursing scrubs, sparkle into a tiny owl with yellow gold eyes, and fly into the trees. The biker took a few seconds longer to remove his boots and then his jeans. He stripped the shirt off, stowed his clothes in the truck along with the owlet's clothing, and then shifted into a mighty snowy owl with better than a 6-foot wingspan. He took to the air as well, wings thumping the air at first, but then he was totally silent. Dev's home encompassed a little over 20 acres, and all structures were below ground. He had a bedroom in most of the Birmingham coterie houses, but this was the one he called home. On this night, Brooke was staying here so she could feed from the tiny owl once she was back in human form. He watched the miniature owl swoop down and catch a small field mouse. 20 minutes later, she caught another. The snowy owl caught and ate a squirrel, but Dev noted the larger owl kept an eye on the smaller one even while he ate. Snakes aren't generally territorial, but the human parts of Dev needed to know who was in his space. It was more about security than a need to mark his land. If you look up the largest prehistoric snake, you'll find information on what archaeologists call a titanoboa, as big around as a school bus, with an estimated weight of over 2,000 pounds. Dev wasn't quite that big, but by modern standards he was huge when he shifted into his full size, his body bigger around than a refrigerator, and his head nearly the size of a small sports car. Usually, he shifted into a smaller version of himself, so he wasn't as hard on the wildlife. Buying a bison and having it delivered ahead of time before a change was expensive. If he was half his normal size, 3 or 4 good-sized deer were enough to fill him up. The tiny owl shifter wouldn't be a meal for a snake under any circumstances. Dev's snake wouldn't consider the larger snowy owl worth his time either. When it was clear the two were simply going to fly and enjoy the night once they'd fed, he went back below ground to finish preparing for the cougar shifters Brooke had agreed to take on. Their paperwork warned their control wasn't great, which was to be expected. What had their mother been thinking? When her boyfriend had been killed, she had gone to Cougar and stayed cat. She had given birth to them in animal form, and no one was certain how the mother raised the cubs in their first months. It's possible they stayed in animal form until they were old enough to learn to walk on 2 legs. Their paperwork said they appeared approximately 3 years old in human form when they were found by werewolves running in the forest, smelling of mountain lion, with no mother to be found. Unlike many bird shifters, mammals are supposed to be born in human form and aren't supposed to shift for the first time until puberty. But nothing about these young men was as it's supposed to be. The new acquisitions would need to be kept isolated until he could properly assess their strength and control, or lack of it. Brooke had purchased them on the auction block to keep them from being sold as sex slaves, which was what they'd been trained to be. She would sell them as sex slaves and make a profit on the sale if they couldn't be domesticated, but she was depending on Dev to do his best with them, so he would. They had a room on the lowest level rather than a cell. He wanted to start things off with them gently, if possible. If he determined they needed to go into a jail cell, those were available, but from what Brooke said, they were looking forward to proving themselves capable of becoming free persons, so he would begin with that mindset. Genie stepped out of the shower and into the bathroom in the guest suite she had been assigned. Frost had handed her over to a snake shifter, assured her that the club had a treaty with the coterie and Dev would keep her safe, and then left. She knew without a doubt that the MC guys would keep her safe, and if Frost said Dev would watch over her, he would, but she was still nervous. She hadn't known she was to be left on her own in a vampire's lair. She took a breath and corrected herself. It was a vampire's coterie, not a lair. Though she wasn't certain there was a difference. There was a whole underground house beneath the property she and Frost had hunted on, and she hadn't even known. She had a backpack with comfortable cotton leggings and an oversized cotton shirt. She assumed a vampire in a child's body wouldn't want her to look sexy, but now she was worried she might be dressed too casually for an ancient being. With a sigh, she pulled out the jeans and shirt she had brought to wear home. The shirt hugged every curve, which wasn't the plan, but she hadn't brought anything else to wear. Maybe she should wear the oversized shirt with the jeans rather than the leggings? She tried both on and put the tighter shirt back on. The other seemed too sloppy, too informal, and the old vampires were almost always formal and extremely well dressed. Not that the jeans and t-shirt were formal in any way, but they were the better of the two choices. She had natural blonde highlights in her deep brown hair. Most shifters didn't have hair that matched their fur or feathers, but her kind of owl did. She pulled the for hair only scissors from her backpack and took 10 minutes to cut her two long hairs shoulder length at an angle on one side, super short in the back, and on the other side. She fluffed it around, angled it a little more on the long side, and then blow-dried it. A little eyeshadow and contour, a lot of eyeliner, mascara, and lipstick, and she was as ready as she would ever be. Everything went back into her backpack, and she settled it on the floor between the bed and the wall, so it wasn't easily seen when someone first stepped into the room. Dev had told her to wait for him to come get her, but she opened the door into the hallway to look out, and two men were standing with their backs to her, looking down the hallway. "I'm sure we came from this direction, so we should go the other way." "He turned us around so many times I can't say the direction, but we didn't walk terribly far the first time, so I think we came from the other direction and we should go this way." The men had their backs to her, but she could see chiseled arm muscles coming out from under their short-sleeved shirts, and could see the definition of sleek, carved muscles on their backs. "He brought me in from the other direction, if that helps," she told them. Both men turned to look at her, and she nearly fell into their eyes, so blue she wasn't sure they could be real. They were gorgeous and identical, twins, and all male. They smelled of cat, big cat. Her inner owl wanted to slink away, but she forced herself to stand taller and meet their gaze. Most mammal shifters couldn't tell the difference between the scent of a great horned owl and a screech owl, and had never even heard of a saw-whet owl. "Birdie, birdie in the sky," one of the men said. "Why'd you do that in my eye?" the other finished. She shook her head. "Sorry, I'll just go back to my room." Genie was in the process of closing her door when one of them pushed it open, knocking her down. Terror took over. She scrambled backwards like a deformed crab, trying to escape them. She usually carried a gun when not at work, but hadn't been allowed to bring one with her to the coteries' property. She knew better than to show fear to a predator, but she couldn't tamp it down. Still, she had to try. She stood and looked at them, standing her ground rather than running, though there was nothing she could do about the rancid scent of her fright. She had learned Krav Maga, but someone had to come at her for that muscle memory to kick in. She tried to think of something to do, but with two of them, she wasn't certain she could do much of anything. "I'm Genie," she told them. "There's no one to properly introduce us, so we should do that ourselves." One of the men stopped in his tracks and said, "I'm Ezra. This is Elijah." "We like to eat little birds," Elijah said, and she saw this cat in his eyes. Yellow, with rounded pupils, which generally meant one of the larger cats, but she had known that from their scent. She had spent some time around a tiger and a leopard, and she was pretty sure they were neither of those, but beyond that she couldn't be certain. "Thankfully, I'm a human at the moment." "And you are all woman," Elijah said. "Look at those tits, Easy." Elijah stepped forward and grabbed her breast, and the Krav Maga muscle memory finally kicked in. Genie knocked his hands loose and punched him in the face before she realized what she was doing. The other brother, Ezra, made the inhuman noise of a cat's growl, stepped forward, grabbed her arms, and twisted them behind her back. He put his face next to hers and said, "Not cool. Apologize to my brother." She had no idea where she found the courage to stare him in the eyes and stand up to him, but she told him, "I'm the one owed an apology." He shook his head. "This is the sex slave floor, yes? You don't knock someone's hands away when they touch your tits, sweet cheeks." "I'm a free person, a nurse, here to feed Brooke, the master vampire. I'm no one's slave." Elijah's hand was on the way to slap her across the face, and Ezra grabbed his wrist to stop him 6 inches before he made contact. Ezra still held Genie's wrist with his other hand, and he released them and stepped back, pulling his brother farther away. "She speaks truth, brother, and we haven't been here long enough to mess with the master's food. We should return to our assigned suite." "You should not have left your suite," a voice said from the hallway, and Genie's knees nearly gave out. She took 2 steps back and sat on the sofa, though it was more of a collapse and completely ungraceful. "Are you okay?" Dev asked her, and his dark brown eyes meant safety rather than the danger of the too blue to be real eyes of the cat shifters. She wanted to tell the huge snake shifter she was fine, but then she began to hyperventilate and she couldn't stop. Fuck, she thought she'd gotten beyond this. She could handle the biggest emergencies with clearness of thought and purpose at the hospital without thinking twice as long as there was no threat to her. but the slightest danger to her own physical safety, and her body wanted to hide in the shadows. The snake shifter pulled something from his pocket, and within moments both cats were face down on the floor, their wrists and ankles bound together with what appeared to be a zip tie made especially for a hog tie. And the snake was beside her, sitting on the sofa. He gingerly pulled her into his lap and held her. Brooke has gone through their minds and telepathically replayed their memories of what happened so I could watch. I told you to stay in the room, little owlet. She barely managed to wheeze between breaths. I didn't know it was dangerous to look out my door. It shouldn't have been, but these two arrived while a few other things happened, and I put them into what should have been a locked room, but it seems they've learned how to defeat electronic locks. Are you okay to go to Brooke now? She expected to feed in the hours before the sun's return, but I failed to keep you safe, so you are no longer obligated to provide sustenance. Genie shook her head. She was doing this for the bikers, and she needed to follow through. If I can just get something to drink? She could manage a whole sentence now, but she had to gulp air in for the next. A couple of shots of whiskey would be great, but tequila is fine. Your metabolism won't burn through it? She shook her head again. Faster than human, but not as fast as most shifters. It'll give me 5 to 10 minutes of calm, and once I'm settled, I can hold on to it. Dev adored the little owlet. Such a curvy, cute little package. There'd be hell to pay for not keeping her safe, but he'd face those consequences later, as would the 2 cats, currently hog-tied on the floor. He telepathed someone to bring some top-shelf whiskey and a shot glass, and he held Genie in his lap while she downed 3 shots, then 3 more, and finally sat relaxed in his arms. The bikers usually give nicknames, yes? Is Genie your real name or a nickname? He wanted to know more about this woman, and it was the only question he could think of that didn't sound inappropriate. It's Georgina, but I'm fine shortening it to Genie. They didn't give you a nickname? Yeah, they did. He caught the hints of, not embarrassment, but discomfort over sharing. So, Genie wasn't her usual nickname, but one they'd decided to call her. Knowing the bikers as he did, this meant she had some magical skill, but not real magic. Something sexual, most likely. What is it you can do that is magical, little owlet? She snuggled her face into his chest. Maybe I'll show you someday, if you're interested. Oh, I would very much be interested, but I'll need permission from my master, since you come to us through our treaty with the bikers. I get that, but I'm my own person. I don't need permission to have sex with whomever I please. There are rules about what I can and can't do while in their clubhouse, but my life is my own. We thought she was a sex slave, one of the men on the floor said. Lying brings on further consequences, and the 2 of you are already in enough hot water. She told you she was not a sex slave, and you heard her speak truth. However, even if she was, unless a sex slave's owner lends him or her to you, you can't treat them with disrespect. You don't get to fuck them on command unless you own them or unless their owner loans or gifts them to you. The Concilio wouldn't have allowed sex between their slaves without permission, but it's possible they would have allowed bullying in their stables. Survival of the fittest. Still, those weren't the rules here, though we might have to give the men some leeway since they hadn't been through orientation and the rules here hadn't been explained. He didn't want to, and he wouldn't give them much, but he acknowledged they truly might have thought they were acting within acceptable norms. Brooke would know more about that once she poked around in their heads a little more. I believe I can see Master Brooke now, Genie told him, and she did, indeed, seem better. Dev stood with the little owlet in his arms and easily used one hand to close the door once they were in the hallway. He was a large man by anyone's standards, and the owlet was tiny in all her forms. At a guess, he'd say about 5 feet tall, and he was certain she was less than 100 pounds, at least 7 of which made up her more than ample breasts. Someone had once told him equating breast size to pounds, as if they were a roast or a brisket, wasn't socially acceptable, but it was the way he thought of them. He mostly kept it to himself, though. I can walk, Dev. I'm fine now. I apologize for losing my composure. Your owl is a predator, but she's one of the smallest of the predators, and is quite often prey as well. You're a snake? I am. Most mammal shifters knew he was a cold-blooded shifter, but couldn't be certain which one. Rarely someone knew right off the bat that not only was he a snake, he was a large snake. Birds were close relatives to reptiles, so perhaps she sensed more. I was almost eaten by a pine snake once, she said. I was offered space to change in a deer sanctuary, completely walled in so there were no large predators, and a friendly wolf on the ground keeping an eye on me. The snake seemed to come out of nowhere, but I managed to dive off the branch at the last minute, so he only ended up with feathers in his mouth. He completely snuck up on me. He? Figuring the gender out for those in snake form was difficult for anyone without a Jacobson's organ. Or she. I don't know. You don't seem afraid of me. You protected me. Just as the wolves have come to represent safety to me, and even Frost in his snowy owl form, you feel the same, at least in human form. That wasn't always the case. He kissed the top of her head without even thinking about it, then realized what he'd done and was a little mortified. Sorry, I don't mean to take liberties, but it's nice when people can see me as protector rather than monster. It was sweet. You're fine, but I really can walk. You're no trouble to carry. To prove his point, he went up 2 flights of steps without jostling her in the least. When they arrived, Dev sat in a large chair, built for his size and not Brooke's, and situated the little owlet on his lap, her chest to his, her head turned and rested on his chest. Little Genie hadn't voiced a preference, and Dev knew from experience it's easier for the vampire to come in from behind when there isn't an established relationship. It's less intimate, less personal, less awkward. Brooke nodded her approval at his choice, and she levitated up to sit on Dev's thighs. Since Genie was straddling them and Brooke's knees rested on top of them, the child vampire was tall enough to easily reach Genie's neck. Dev had tilted Genie's head so the side with the shorter hair was accessible. Brooke touched beside where she intended to bite, licked the spot a few times to put the deadening saliva on, and then took her time sinking her teeth into the little owl. Dev had been told that, for a vampire, predators taste completely different than prey, and that feeding from a shifter who is both predator and prey is a special delicacy. Not something they want all the time, because most powerful vampires prefer to drink from apex predators, but it's a special treat. Genie relaxed into Dev while Brooke fed, and he used his left hand to lightly embrace Brooke as well. Dev adored Brooke, and he loved watching her feed. Everyone in the coterie knew down to their toenails that Brooke is far from a child, and yet she looks like a child, so feeding her seems to mean more than feeding an adult vampire. The deal with the bikers was that the coterie would provide a safe place for the owl to sleep after she fed Brooke, and would feed her both before she went to sleep and again when she rose, and then would provide transportation to her apartment. Dev had originally planned to let the coterie's usual driver take her, but if he could splice away enough time, he would personally drive her home. He also planned to eat both meals with her because the little owl fascinated him, and if he wasn't mistaken, she'd offered sex. He needed to let Brooke know so she could negotiate that with the bikers, but not yet. Want to see what happens when these 4 collide? Spoiler, it's chaos, it's hot, and nobody's walking away unchanged. The full book is available in Kindle Unlimited, link in the description. And if you enjoyed this, hit subscribe because I'll be reading more from my paranormal romance backlist. Thanks for listening.